The prosecution began their opening statement with humanizing the victim, Officer John O'Keefe. I like it when they do that. Whether the accused is guilty, not guilty, or innocent, the humanity of the victim is important. The loss of this man matters a great deal. He's not here to speak for himself, and it's important not to lose sight of the victim, no matter what you think of the accused. The prosecution's open sounded like many drunk driving cases, but they threw in the twist that the victim and the accused were in a soured relationship. It was a little weird the way it was laid out, but opening statements are not evidence. We'll see what the evidence shows. The defense started with Karen Reed was framed. I have to admit, I had a reaction to this and had to take a minute. He also said the investigation was shoddy. Again, I had to take a step back. If I had $1 for every time I heard an accused say I was framed, I'd be rich. Usually, though, you don't hear the lawyer state on the record that the police conspired to frame a law-abiding citizen for murder. And hearing the defense decry the investigation as shoddy or biased is something you hear a lot of too. There's a bit of a joke that goes, let's see if I can remember this. You argue the facts. If the facts are not on your side, you argue the law. If the law is not on your side, you attack the investigation. I'm telling you all this to explain why I had to take a step back. I was aware that my mind suddenly closed, and I had to stop and deal with that within myself. The accused is innocent unless proven guilty, and that's got to mean something. It's got to be more than just lip service or a thing that people on the news say to avoid getting sued. And that's not just for the sake of the accused. That's for the sake of all of us. So I had to recognize my own bias and deal with it. The defense laid out a litany of points to support his contention. Again, opening statements aren't evidence, and I will wait for the evidence. But I have to admit, there were a number of things on his list that made me go, The first witness was Paul O'Keefe, Officer John O'Keefe's brother. The prosecution asked him about arguments between John and Karen, and he said they were typical arguments. He said he did witness 2 intense arguments between the couple. On the night that John was killed, a snowstorm was expected. Paul said he went to bed at about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and there were a few flurries. He also said he spoke with John over a group text. John was proud of the kids' accomplishments in school. Karen was included in that group text. If the relationship was so terrible, why include her? Then again, people do that sort of thing. Just something to think about in the context of their respective behaviors overall as we learn about them. Might not mean anything. At 6:40 in the morning, Paul was notified that something had happened to John. He headed to the hospital. The roads were bad. All this snow is going to make a difference when it comes to evidence collection. Snow can hide things, but it can reveal things too. We'll see. When he got to the hospital, Karen was there and was screaming, "Is he dead?" over and over. This is not abnormal behavior. Paul said when he saw John's eyes were swollen. Some people might point to this as evidence of an injury to the face, but that's not necessarily true. It could be edema from fluid or tissue damage if he'd been in freezing temperatures all night. We'll see what the medical experts have to say. Paul noticed wounds on one of John's arms. Paul said that prior to all of this, he held Karen in high regard and they had a good relationship. He thought Karen was good for John and good for the kids. He even commented about this to Karen's family. And I note that when he made these comments, this was after the 2 arguments he said he'd witnessed. Obviously, these arguments weren't so horrible as to cause him to be concerned or to think that the couple should split up. This is important considering the prosecution is saying the relationship had soured. After the hospital, Karen went over to see the kids. She went with her dad and brother. They showed ring video of people coming and of snow removal activities. It shows how heavy the snow really was. There was a section where you could see the accused's vehicle, but you could only see one of the taillights, not both. The other thing that happened during this visit was that Karen went upstairs with her father and retrieved some of her belongings. She would normally stay at the house for a few nights out of the week, but she had her own home elsewhere. You know, if police were suspicious of her from the beginning, you would think they wouldn't let her be going into John's house and taking anything out. But I don't know yet at what point they thought she'd done something. The police did not go to John's house that day. The next witness was Erin O'Keefe, Paul's wife. She and Karen met through John and had become friends. She was asked about arguments that Karen and John had. And Erin said they were just typical relationship arguments, normal relationship issues. She said one of the arguments was when Karen saw John kissing another woman during a trip to Aruba. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Being angry, having an argument, does not equal murder. It doesn't even equal motive. It's about the people and who they are. Some people will lash out physically over little things, seemingly nothing. It's never really nothing, but that's a whole other conversation. Most people get angry or upset at some point, and most of them don't go around killing other people over it. This woman scorned trope really does a disservice on multiple levels. I'll leave that one there lest I go on a big rant. On January 28th, Karen told Erin she wished she'd never spoken to an O'Keefe after 2004. Clearly, she and John were arguing. John said that Karen was spoiling the kids. Erin said she went to bed at midnight, but that around 10:30 or 11, the snow was starting to accumulate outside. Now, this is different from Paul's a few flurries. It doesn't mean anyone's lying, just that they remember differently, or that maybe one was looking out at a different time or at a different item, like snow might accumulate on the back deck more so than on a traveled road. When Erin learned about John in the morning, she called Karen. Karen picked up the phone and screamed into it, "John's dead." Karen's friend, Carrie, grabbed the phone and said, "No, he's not. They're working on him." I've seen this sort of thing before. I don't make much of it, especially in the absence of other behaviors. Erin testified that Karen told her she dropped John off at a party and she woke up at 4 a.m. and he wasn't home yet. She said she went to go look for him, but that the roads were bad, so she called her friends Carrie and Jen to go with her. Erin also testified that when Karen was at the hospital, she'd said she had to remember the bad times, and Erin thought this was odd, but chalked it up to Karen being medicated. This can also be trauma. This sounds like someone trying to figure out how to mentally cope with the loss. Karen also told Erin she'd never see her again. Well, Karen just lost her link to Erin. That was John. And she's suddenly grappling with what's happened and that life as she knew it was gone. It would be forever changed. And she was right. The next witness was Officer Saraf. He's an experienced officer and the first on the scene. It was snowing and dark out at the time he responded.
Well, as I got to my destination, I saw 3 people on the lawn of in the snow, waving at me.
And initially, when you see these 3 people in the snow, do you have any idea sort of who they are, or male, female, anything like that?
There were 3 women, and I later learned there was a male subject on the ground.
Those 3 people attempting to render aid to Officer O'Keefe were Karen Reed and her friends. What's missing here? Why do the homeowners not come out? There's a guy on the front lawn. There's a commotion. I mean, Karen's obviously not going to be quiet about it, even if they don't know who it was. I mean, wasn't this a police officer who lived here? Would they not call anybody? Would they not come out? And when they see lights and hear sirens, do you not go outside and at least see what the heck is going on? It's weird. And the people in the house knew who Karen was. So when they see her outside on their front lawn, do they not go see if she's all right or see what's going on? It's a little bit weird. Also note that as the officer approached, he was able to see the victim on the ground. How then, if John O'Keefe had been on the ground since the night before, could all of those partygoers have walked right past him and not noticed? Yet this officer was able to see him even though it's still dark and even though the snow is worse than it was earlier.
Let me ask it a different way. So as far as you mentioned that when you arrived there, it was snowing out, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so how much snow was in and around or on top of Mr. O'Keefe when you first observed?
It was about, I would say about 6 inches on the ground. There was a light dusting on top of them, I would say.
A light dusting, not caked. If John had been buried in the snow and Karen dug him out, which is not what's alleged, then there would have been caked snow on him. It wouldn't be a light dusting. A light dusting, when snow had accumulated all night, suggests he was not there all night. And before anybody says, oh, maybe it was a dry snow, well, his body heat would have caused some of that snow to cake. The witness was asked about other injuries to John. Let's listen to his response.
Around that time when you were checking the pulse in the carotid area for Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, other observations did you make with regard to any injuries or anything else on Mr. O'Keefe?
Well, when I first got there, he had blood on his face and it was just wiped away. So that's the only.
So there was blood on his face that was wiped away?
That's correct.
We know there were injuries to his arm. That the officer didn't note these doesn't mean they weren't there, but it does raise a different question. That's his clothing. Was the sleeve of his coat or whatever he was wearing all torn up, consistent with where the injuries to his arm were? Are we going to see the clothes? Are we going to hear about that? The witness was asked about what Karen was saying or doing. Here's his response.
Miss Reed was visibly upset. She kept saying, this is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this. And she was very hysterical.
This is not the same as an admission, just so you know. It's pretty normal in the circumstances.
At some point, the fire department takes Mr. O'Keefe's body off of the lawn. Is that correct?
That is
And where were you in relation to Mr. O'Keefe when that happened?
I don't remember.
And if you don't remember, do you recall anything about sort of what the ground looked like when Mr. O'Keefe was lifted up?
I don't recall. I didn't.
I'm a bit surprised, actually. He'd noticed that Karen's face had blood on it because she'd attempted to resuscitate John. One would have expected blood on the ground. If he'd had a head wound and had been there all night, the cold might play into the amount of blood, but I'd need a medical expert to explain that a little bit more. He was found on the front lawn, 20 feet from the road. Is there a theory that she hit him and he walked to the lawn himself? or that she drove right up on the lawn with nobody noticing. It will be interesting to see how much blood was found there and if there was blood found anywhere else.
And so where in relation to this photograph, if you can see it here, was Mr. O'Keefe's body when you first got it?
It's right in this area right here.
I'm noting it's not like he was hidden. On the dash cam, you can see that Karen Reed is obviously upset. Cross-examination will be tomorrow. I already have a lot of questions. This is already weird. I didn't go down the Karen Reed rabbit hole before this, but now I'm really curious. That's all I've got for you for now. Trust your gut. See you in the comments.